Hi, everyone, and welcome to this latest webinar from the Podcast Academy. I'm Michelle Cobb, the Executive Director of the Podcast Academy, and I'm pleased to be here with you today, mostly to be talking to the lovely and talented Donald Albright. He is the Vice Chair of the Podcast Academy, and he is here to answer all your questions. There is a Q&A box towards the bottom of your screen, and please put your questions in that, not in the chat box, so we can be sure to get to them. This is going to be a fun and breezy conversation, nothing formal. So, feel free to ask the things that you would like to ask. And we encourage you to check out the Podcast Academy if you're not yet a member. We put some things in the chat box, links to our website. It's only $100 to join. And we are taking submissions for the Ambies, which are our first Podcast Academy Awards. It's going to be held in March of next year, and we're taking submissions until December 15th. So please check it out, ambies.com. If you've had any problems with our website this week, we do apologize. We've had a little vendor in and out, but the ambies.com is up and running. So if you go directly there, you shouldn't see any issues. All right, Donald, you are, of course, the founder of Tenderfoot TV, so we have lots of questions about that. But I would love for you to start with just giving us a little bit of background about how you got into podcasting.
Yeah, sure. First, thank you for having me do this. I'm always willing to talk and share information. And thank everyone for tuning in who will either watch this live or rebroadcast. But podcasting was nowhere near on my radar in terms of like what I was going to do in my career next. Like I was at the time, for the past 20 years, I've been in the music industry, 20 plus years now. Promotions, marketing, managing, recording artists, producers, writers, that kind of thing. And it was going well. Touring the world, selling millions of records, having fun, didn't feel like work. And then with anything else, you start to it kind of becomes monotonous, and you start to see the industry changing maybe in a direction that you don't want it to go. And I started to feel like I was burnt out, and Payne Lindsay, who at the time during music, he was producing and directing music videos for artists that I was managing. And so we developed a really good creative relationship over probably 4 years. And then he actually had the idea of, I want to take this directing and producing into TV and make a true crime documentary. And we realized pretty quickly that we didn't have any relationships in Hollywood to go do that. I was on board to try it because I wanted to, do something different than music. And he actually had the idea after listening to Serial that if they can make, something that compelling in audio only form, then that's something that we should probably try. And that was up and vanished. So we decided really to, just use podcasting as a stepping stone to get to TV. We're hoping that we can have a successful enough podcast where a network would want to make a docuseries out of it. And it was really not something that we intended on staying in and doing more and more podcasts. But after Up and Vanished, blew up kind of over a 6-month period, ended up making 2 arrests and a 10-year-old cold case. And the podcast blew up. And, me being an entrepreneur, always, having started businesses when I was in high school, all throughout my professional career, I looked at it as an opportunity to now build something in the podcast space. And that's, was Tenderfoot. And we just kept growing and scaling based on that true crime audience. And now here we are.
And were you a true crime listener before that?
Love true crime. Always have. Never, ever thought to make true crime. I was making albums, making hip hop and R&B records, but always, Dateline. I watched The Jinx. I watched Making a Murderer. You name it, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Just to everything. There's something about true crime that even people who say they don't like true crime, they want to like it. There's something about it that draws them in, and they just might not be able to take it, but everyone is intrigued by it.
Excellent. That is true. I count myself among those people. So what are the keys to growing Tenderfoot over the past 4 years?
Really, it was interesting because, like I said, we didn't plan on starting a podcast company. So we didn't know the first thing about starting or launching a podcast. We kind of just, for our benefit, I think, didn't subscribe to any rules that may have existed.
Mhm.
And we just went after it the best way that we knew how. Thankfully for us, coming from the music industry, we came from a medium that was further advanced than podcasting in terms of the aggressiveness in marketing and aggressiveness in promotion. And I mean, podcasting had only been around for a decade or so, and in storytelling, not even for that long, right? So there was just had a lot of growth, a lot of growing to do within podcasting. So we just took some of the tactics that we learned in music, from viral marketing to street promotion to, like, you name it, and we just try to implement all of that into podcasting to see if how it would be received and if it would work. And I mean, we grew up and vanished simply by, like, this cold case happened in this small town of 3,000 people in South Georgia. So, like, that's ground zero for our marketing campaign, right? If you can get 3,000
Ah,
people in this town, then you can get, 20,000 people in the county, and then you go for the South Georgia, and then the state, right? And so targeted Facebook ads, targeted Twitter ads, and just trying to appeal to that base. And that worked, and it blew up. And then as we decided to to actually have a company and then scale that company, we didn't have any investment. Like, we never brought on a dollar of, outside financing for the company. This was started
hmm.
with, two guys, a microphone, and a couple $100. And then when it came time to scale out that company, we couldn't take many risks, right? If we one flop of a podcast, and it could put us out of business. So
Right.
we stuck with what our audience wanted, which was true crime. So while we love true crime, we consume all type of content. We're not making true crime because we simply that's our whole life, right? Like, we just did it because it was the smart way to scale our business. If they liked Up and Vanished, then they would like maybe Sworn, or Atlanta Monster, and then To Live and Die in LA. So we just scaled based on audience. And now we're at a point where we've, developed partnerships with different networks, and like iHeart and Cadence, where we can now take more risk, and do things that are more true crime adjacent, or maybe not true crime at all. So it's really just about being smart about who our audience was, taking risks, but taking calculated risks.
So that leads well into my next question. What advice do you have for people who are exploring how to grow their career in the podcast industry today?
Oh, so I think there's I think two answers to that, because really it depends on, like, who that person is, right? If that person is starting their own business, or if they're working within the industry. If you're starting your own business, I think you have to really try to take a similar approach to what we took, which is, like, starting with one thing that's successful, and then trying to scale based on that, right? If you cast too wide of a net, you really don't have an identity, right? So we're trying to create an identity and really give the audience something to return to, versus trying to rebuild, something from scratch every single time. So I think you take that approach, and you start with one podcast, and you learn from that. We learned so much from our first project that influenced the rest of our slate, in a very positive way. Learn from your own mistakes, and where you can, you learn from other people's mistakes, right? So um, listening to me tell you about my mistakes will help you avoid making some of those same mistakes. And then from someone who's working within the industry, I think it's about networking and not being afraid to reach out, not being afraid to invest in yourself, right? Like, they're from being part of organizations to being part of, you know, whether it be mailing lists, subscriptions, you have to be in the industry, investing in your craft by, going to podcast movement and other things that are within our industry where you can network with people. Because if you're trying to be the best editor or producer, you need to surround yourself with those kind of people. And it's not easy to find, because it's not like there isn't a Hollywood of podcasting, right? You can't move from Idaho to Hollywood, waitress, and then come up on some opportunities. you have to really go out there and find them, and they're out there now. But you have to invest in yourself. If it's $100, $50, or whatever it is that you have to be, so that you can be part of webinars, you can be part of just the inside access. I think that's the best thing you can do, because you're only one contact away from like that new job or that promotion or whatever it may be. So yeah, I think that's, covers, if you're, like I said, if you're an independent making content, just kind of one role you, or one path you take. And if you're within the industry, there's probably another, but I think that kind of covers all the people.
Well, it makes it seem like we should come up with where the Hollywood of podcasting should be, right? Somewhere to
Yeah,
move to.
I'm pushing for Atlanta. I'm trying hard.
Oh, well, I think you're doing well. I'm curious. I'll ask a question about Up and Vanished. You guys did have a big influence on getting people to trial. Was that a surprise for you?
I mean, total surprise. We never thought we're gonna help solve this case, right? It was interesting, and it just kept evolving. It's weird because I don't recommend that you make a podcast that way. We were literally producing an episode, releasing an episode, producing an episode, releasing an episode, because it's not like Hollywood where you have this closed in story with a fixed ending. You have this story and you don't know what's going to happen. And you get breaking news on a Wednesday, you have an episode coming out on Friday, you have to go add that into the episode. So we didn't expect any of that, and we learned kind of how to produce in the most difficult way possible. So I think everything after that felt like it was easier to do. But I think we didn't plan for it. We just kind of tried to use it and build off of it. And you kind of think that you want that in the back of your mind, but you never think it's going to actually happen. You know what I mean? So it was great to really have people feel like we contributed to, a 10-year-old cold case. There's family, there's a community that was devastated by this, friends, and we've since done a TV special on that case and adapted Up and Vanished to a TV series, and just maintain those relationships with the mayor of that small town, with the best friend of the victim. It becomes very real, very quick, and it's no longer like this thing that we want to do, right? It's this thing that we're now involved, we're in the middle of, and it takes us to a different level of importance and seriousness beyond just like, hey, I want to make a podcast, right? Like, you're dealing with real things and you can get yourself caught in the middle of something. So you have to really be prepared for it and be respectful of it.
And also, it ultimately, for the good work you did, it got you to your goal of television. So that's kind of an interesting piece of the story as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing I'll say about that is that while we never anticipated on, creating a podcast company and staying in podcasting, once we made a TV show, we realized how great the podcast medium was for storytelling, for just the freedom of what you can say and how you tell a story, the connection with the audience. I mean, I still love true crime documentaries, still want to make shows for TV, but podcasting is where it's at. Like, there's absolutely no reason to skip that step, because as a creator, there's no other medium that's going to allow you that freedom to do what you do and to prove out your concept, and to build audience as well. It's not like a pilot, you're actually putting something out, building audience, and then showing Hollywood, like, this is my product and this is how successful it was. So no better place.
You talked about, the sort of challenges of putting this all together. And of course, in the past 6 months, we as a society have faced a very interesting new challenge. So how has the pandemic impacted Tenderfoot in particular, and really the industry as a whole from your perspective?
Yeah, for Tenderfoot, it was probably more difficult than I think other companies, because we disproportionately, we don't do any talk style shows. Like, all of our shows require face-to-face interaction, in market, gathering content and research and investigating. So it's difficult to go knock on someone's door in a pandemic, you know what I mean? And say, hey, I'm trying to locate this person, or in Up and Vanished, like, Payne was crawling underneath houses looking for evidence and stuff like that. So things you just can't do. And so we had a lot of projects that were in the middle of production. that were put on hold, some that were pushed to 21, and others that were enough of the research and enough of the investigative elements were done so that we were able to do follow-up interviews through Zoom. So I think for people who did do shows where it's, you can do it from your home and you're just doing more of like a talk style show, the Zoom transition was much easier for them. For us, we had to really figure it out and then decide, like, are we lowering the quality to a point where our listeners aren't going to, receive it as well? And so it was a case by case basis, but I think we figured it out, and we, like I said, pushed back projects where we felt we needed to, and wrapped up projects, with as many precautions as we possibly could when we did have to travel. Because there were some shows where we did finish traveling throughout the pandemic, and just try to be extra safe and respectful of everyone's wishes, in those interviews. So there's that side of it. I think from an industry standpoint, it really, look, I don't know what the numbers are going to be this year, but I know we are on pace, I think, for $1 billion in ad revenue.
Yes.
I know for a fact that Q2, Q3 ad revenue, ad revenues got hit just because it wasn't that people were not listening to podcasts anymore. I think for a minute there was probably a small dip as we transitioned from, driving to work to staying at home, because if you're listening to podcasts while you're driving to work, your routine is now flipped upside down. And then school is back in, and you're now a homeschool teacher and you have a full-time job, right? So like everyone had to get their routine back in order. And I think podcasting, the listener, if there was a dip, and for some shows there was, some there weren't, it balanced itself out at some point. The problem was that the advertisers were more so spooked, because while people may still be listening, are they going to be buying, right? If I'm advertising this $70 toothbrush, are people buying that toothbrush during a pandemic or not? So the listenership may have been there, but the desire to buy those advertised products, there was some questions around if they were going to be there. But I think it's rebounding well. So it hasn't hurt us from that standpoint financially. But so I think the industry as a whole has done better than most. And I think, we're thankful for that. And one other thing, I think for our shows, we make darker shows, true crime, you know what I mean? And
True.
During a pandemic, do people want to hear about someone missing or murdered or a serial killer, right? And probably not. Not only that, but they're also want to hear what Sanjay Gupta has to say on the CNN podcast about coronavirus. So there's just about, from a political landscape to the pandemic, there's so much competition in, where people get their information, and they're getting it more and more from podcasts. And so certain genres are going to take a hit. So, but I think true crime is going to always be around. So our core flagship shows are going to always be okay. And we use this time in the pandemic to also do a lot of development and figure out like our version of weekly shows and our version of shows that aren't true crime. So we use it wisely, and hopefully in 21 we'll be able to come with shows that will, are even more broad than what we had before.
Is it causing you to look at producing children's shows? I know those are doing well, as we're all teaching from home now.
Yeah. I had an opportunity to help a friend, Tracy Kaplan, who's executive produced and developed 10 News. So I'm executive producing that. It's a 10-minute news show for kids in that 10-year-old range. Mm-hmm. And it's short, 10 minutes, 2 times a week. But yeah, my daughters listen to it. And just, I think just the success that we've had in podcasting has just allowed us to, if it's not a project that's perfect for Tenderfoot, for example, we've established the relationships to where I can find a show that I really love, and just how can I help that show? How can I help that creator, and just make the connection with, the distributor or with talent or whatever it may be. So I think that's another just way we can contribute to podcasting as a whole, without it having to always be like, a Tenderfoot project, because we want to be a very specific type of company. And some shows we feel are perfect for Tenderfoot, others we feel are not part of the Tenderfoot brand, but that we can still figure out how do we help that show from a marketing standpoint, or like I said, from making those deals.
Well, that leads nicely into the next question, because people do want to know how they can work with Tenderfoot TV, or how they can get their podcast noticed by you and your team. So what guidance do you have for people?
For us, it's interesting because we're a small company. we have like 10 employees, I think now, which sounds big because we started with me, Payne, and Payne's brother for like the first 9 months of the company, which is like a very, very small operation. But because we're so small and we devote all of our resources to like our creative team. Anytime you get an email back from Tenderfoot TV, it's from me or from Payne. It's not like we don't have like the administrative setup
Wow.
where there's like that person. So like it just whatever hat needs to be worn, I put it on and we go from there. And that's just, from being an entrepreneur, that's kind of what you do, right? If you can't afford a graphic designer, you learn how to do Photoshop, right? You just learn these things. And so I'm fine with like communicating directly with someone who says, hey, I have an idea, and may not be able to get to it as fast as I used to, but you send an email, like you go to our website, tenderfoot.tv. There's, all of our shows are on there. Our employees are on there. Contacts information is on there. And it's as easy as just saying, hey, I have this idea, or, I want a job here, or this is my resume, whatever it is that you want. And you're likely to get a response from one of the owners of the company, and it's really that simple. And we're looking for that. Like I'm always looking for, who are the best, editors and story editors, and specific to what we do, right? Like it's difficult in podcasting to find the person who does the exact job when you're doing something that's a little bit more niche than kind of what the mainstream of podcasting is. It's not easy to find a podcast editor that can edit, documentary style, right? So I'm always looking for people, and if they're reaching out to me, I'll have to look less. So please, like, reach out to us with your show ideas, because we do collaborations all the time with creators, with producers, even with talent that just says, hey, I want to get into podcasting, but I don't necessarily have an idea, but I love Tenderfoot shows and would love to do a show with you. So it's pretty wide open. Just shoot us an email, and I'll probably be emailing you back.
Well, that's exciting for people to know. And I apologize for your email inbox filling up there. I will also say that we did a webinar with a couple of your staff a few months ago that's available on the Podcast Academy website. It's free and open for everyone. And I encourage people, if you're interested in true crime and interviewing, it's a great resource to go and take a look at.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was a good one. That Christina and Meredith were
Yeah.
They're pretty.
I still admit to being a true crime podcast junkie, so it was like, oh, I get to learn all the ins and outs of how it's done. It's fun.
Yeah, I learn from them all the time too, so it's great.
And I will say, for our listening audience and visual audience here, we do have a Q&A box, so please type your questions into it. We actually just have one come in. Do you find audio editors are generally lacking skills you need? And if so, which ones?
Yeah, great question. Yes, generally lacking the skills that we need, because it's kind of the explosion of narrative storytelling in audio form. Serial is like, every opportunity I have to give props to like Serial and what they did with that franchise, I do. And I think that set the standard so high, and that's what we wanted to create. And it's hard to find like that's a certain skill that you honestly don't know that you have unless you have done it before or are trying it. And so many people are trying to do it now that everyone is looking for that. Everyone's looking for that story editor, that audio editor who can figure out, I can take this 30-minute interview and cut it down to the best 7 and rearrange the order in case, it wasn't necessarily delivered in the right way, or the arc of the podcast episode is different than the arc of like that interview. And then how do I put music under that? It's so much more than just understanding how to edit audio. So I working in music for 20 years. I know a lot of audio engineers, and I'm always trying to convince them, hey, come over and learn this process. You don't know if you're good at it until you try it. And I think there's some of them are just natural at it, because if you edited music, songs, if you're doing the right songs and artists, there's a story in there, and you're usually editing a story. Or if you're doing interludes or skits, those, that's audio production in a storytelling way. So yeah, to answer the question, those skills are, I find, lacking. And the more people that we find who can do that, the more we can crank out. I mean, that's the goal now. Is like the podcast industry is moving so fast that you have to keep up with it. You have to be kicking out content, and it really boils down to who's making it. Because I always tell people, you have an idea, that's great, but everyone has ideas, right? You have resources and access, that's even better, right? So to have an idea and access is great, but at the end of the day, who's going to make it sound great? If you take all of the same content on a drive and you give it to 5 different podcast companies, they're going to kick you out 5 different podcasts at varying levels of that are better or worse, however, whatever, in a matter of opinion. But it's about who's going to add that secret sauce in the production of it, in the developing the story properly and editing it that way. That's going to actually make it lasting and make it connect with an audience.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. All right, a little wider question. You're an entrepreneur. What are you most tuned into today concerning the business world?
So, I mean, my time is all, taken up in podcasting. So in terms of like the business world as it relates to podcasting, what I'm most interested in is how the acquisitions is a big thing, right? We've seen, I mean, what Spotify spending $1 billion on, acquisitions. We've seen, I was right there as iHeart bought House of Works a couple years ago, because I had previous business with House of Works that now put me in business with iHeart. So just seeing trying to understand which companies are being acquired, what these companies like Spotify and iHeart and the broadcast radio companies who are looking to invest, and what are they looking for in these companies, right? Are they more into the catalog and IP value of big franchises? Are they into the machine of being able to kick out weekly content? What is that sweet spot that they're looking for? And how does that differ from what we do as a company? Because at the end of the day, we want to grow our company and make strategic partnerships and be able to scale up without losing the quality of shows that we make. So I'd love to give people 5 more up and vanished, type projects, but they take a long time. And I can only do that by scaling up the company. And that usually comes with some sort of infusion from investment or partnership. So I'm really interested in knowing and understanding kind of why those things happen. And when a company gets bought from or gets acquired, sometimes I'll talk to the previous, to the upstart, like the person who started that company that it was then acquired, and, just learn more and more about kind of what they were doing. And you find out the strangest things. There is really no rule of what these companies are looking for. Spotify has certain metrics and certain things that they value when they're looking to buy a company. A broadcast radio company like an iHeart or Intercom, they're looking for something specific that meets their needs. Then you have the software and tech companies like Amazon and Facebook. What are their plans? What are Apple's plans? So I'm always very interested in trying to get as much information as I can about who's buying, because at some point there might be a price tag on Tenderfoot, and we'll have to see kind of I want to be prepared for that.
Studying now, that's a good plan. So how have you seen the podcasting industry evolve over the years, and what do you see for the future?
Man, it's changed so much since we got in August of 2016. That was the first episode of Up and Vanished. That's when it launched. And I think the way we look at the analytics for podcasting has completely changed and for the better every single time. I mean, if we're initially we were baking in ads into the episodes and they would live there forever. That was just the complete wrong approach. But the industry there wasn't kind of the infrastructure there to do it in a different way that had been picked up across the board. So that model has changed a lot. Analytics have gotten so much better that advertisers feel more comfortable now. The goal is you want to bring in the Coca-Colas and the Home Depots, the Deltas, and having them spend money on pre-produced ads that they can drop in and out whenever they want through dynamic insertion. And but to appeal to those companies, you have to have the analytics to back up. You can't just say
Right.
we have this many downloads. And it's like, okay, what is a download? Is that, are they actually hearing my ad? And now, Apple has analytics that show you, not just the listens and downloads, but like episode consumption. Like if your episode's has a 50% consumption rate, they're not listening to the whole episode. If it's 90, they've listened to all of those ads. And now we have tracking to where you can, specifically if your ad is in the third spot, what the difference is between that third impression and that first one, and you can value those differently. So that's been huge in terms of legitimizing the financials and making this an industry that Fortune 500 companies feel confident in dumping boatloads of money into, and that helps everyone, the independent podcaster and the major podcaster or the podcast companies. And actually that brings to kind of the next point of like the evolution is what you're seeing, like I talked about, all the acquisitions. There's so many smaller companies and creative companies have been bought out by the bigger companies, and that scares me a little bit, because one thing I talked about with TV versus podcasting is the freedom, and you don't want podcasting to become Hollywood, to become TV, because there's very little creative freedom there, especially for new creators. And you don't want corporate interests and, people who aren't seeing a project creatively the same way that you are to be able to stop a project. And luckily we still maintain creative control of our projects, even when we do partnerships with the bigger companies, but that we have leverage because we started early and we've grown over 4 years. But the new podcaster who does a deal with a major company might not have that leverage. And there might be sections in that agreement that say what they can and can't do. And I always, look at that as a red flag. So I love that the investment is coming in, because the iHearts are going to be able to bring in the bigger sponsors. If they're advertising on their million stations, that they have all around the country, it's not hard for Bob Pittman to go talk to AT&T and Coca-Cola and say, hey, we're deep into this podcasting space now, bring some of that money over here. Right. But so that everything comes with a price. It's going to be give and take. But, being an independent, I've been independent all my life. I've only had maybe 2 jobs that were like actual, paycheck, go to work, come home. And like, since I was 16. So as someone who's always been independent from like in adulthood, I've very, very serious about like not giving up, your independence especially when being in a creative space. So that scares me a little bit, but I think there's more to be optimistic about in terms of the future of podcasting than to be pessimistic about, because more and more creators are being drawn to the space, and great creators from Hollywood who've made, you have Mark Smerling, who made The Jinx, making Crime Town, and making Ballad of Billy Balls and making RFK tapes. Like, we need that. And the money will bring more people over. So again, the money comes in, the corporate companies come in, they can draw more talent from Hollywood. It's going to make better content. And the content itself is getting better. There's more of it. So it's all benefiting the listener. And I do see like a trend in paid content or windowed content, which still on the fence about, but I think it works in certain cases, like Audible, for example, has their Audible originals, but they have a consumer base already. So it makes sense to do a project with someone that already has a built-in audience. You have the luminaries popping up, which are putting a lot of money into podcasting, which is great, but it's a new model because they're a new company starting a subscription base. It's not like Spotify, for example, that already had a music base and is now offering podcasting. So it'll be interesting to kind of figure out who's going to win. Like I call it like the platform wars. Like everyone's throwing big punches, and I'm going to spend 100 million here. I'm going to spend 200 there, and I'm going to buy this company. So I'm just sitting back watching and kind of trying to evaluate like who's winning and where the industry is going and what's going to happen. Like what's the fallout from that. But I think it's mostly positive that so many people are getting into it, and that the creative is evolving in a positive way with scripted shows and A-list talent coming from Hollywood to to do podcasting. So there's a lot to be excited about, and we're getting into all that as well. We announced scripted development with Lights Out, to do a couple of scripted shows, and we've been developing some others as well. So yeah, we're trying to keep pace, and if not, be ahead where we can. So it's fun, and it's going to be exciting moving forward.
Well, it's exciting to be in an industry that is, fairly new. You're talking about being, in the industry for really less than 5 years now,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
trying
I
to
always
keep on
laugh
top
at
of
that.
it.
Like, people are like, you're a podcast expert. I'm like, yeah, I guess if you say so. Like, I've been doing it for 4 years, and when I started, I knew nothing. So I've been really doing it for like 3 years when I actually kind of knew it. But I guess when the industry is so young, and you enter, like we entered at the right time. Like, I always tell people, you can't do what Tenderfoot did. That industry doesn't exist anymore. You have to do it your way. You can learn from how Wondery did it. You can learn from how Tenderfoot did it, how Gimlet did it, but it's a new industry now. So you have to take what's still relevant, disregard what is no longer relevant. But the competition is way tougher now. You know what I mean? We the reason Up and Vanish blew up is because I had like $2,000 left on one credit card. And I was like, okay. And Payne wanted me to buy some ads for Up and Vanished on this podcast called The Breakdown, another true crime podcast about an Atlanta case. So we felt like, Georgia, true crime, this is our shot. Let's advertise. So we talked them down from like a $4,000 ad, like a $2,000 ad. That was like right within the credit limit that I had left. Swipe my credit card, investing, like going all in on, this new venture. And at the same time, like Steve Wilson from Apple tweeted about Up and Vanished, our cover being a cover that he liked. And then we featured us in New and Noteworthy. And the podcast industry at that time was so small that he could do that. He could find this new independent podcast, like the artwork, tweet about it, and people just were like, oh, that's cool. I like that too. Put it in New and Noteworthy. And it's like, it's a big thing. Now there's so much content that it's harder to get noticed. So our podcast literally started to blow up from that moment. That one ad buy and that one New and Noteworthy feature happened in the same week. And we literally never looked back since then. I don't think it's that easy anymore. So it's harder to make it, but there are more roadmaps out there. You have to just piece together the parts that no longer make sense and kind of devise your own, plan of how to get to the destination.
Interesting. All right. I will just remind people, if they have a question, put it in the Q&A box. I saw someone had raised a hand, so I wasn't sure if that was a question. But Donald, I'm going to ask you to pivot a little and talk a bit about your role as vice chair of the Podcast Academy. What's your vision for the organization as we move forward? We're even younger than Tenderfoot is, launching officially in June, so quite new.
Yeah, it's interesting because when I first got the call of being part of the academy and being one of the founding governors, I wanted to be a part of it for one, because it was time for me to like no longer be the guy on the outside, which I've always been my entire career. I was like, okay, if I can bring what being on the outside of everything for so long, if I can bring that mentality on the inside, I think it'll benefit the industry as a whole. And because I'm not like a podcast lifer, someone who didn't even know this medium had value, I have a different perspective than probably other people. And not that everyone else has the same perspective, but we all have different perspectives. And I think that's something that I could offer. So I didn't even know what I wanted to get out of it. I just know I wanted to contribute to it somehow. And so I think now being part of it, being able to form a relationship with all these other governors and really see like the company that I'm in, I see like how powerful that room is to be in. And then I started thinking, okay, now I'm getting a better understanding of what this can be, because we have all of these people and because the goals are clearly set out to what we want to be, but not necessarily, we had to come together and figure out how do we actually get to those points, right? We want to be an organization that can educate, that can bring people together, share information. We want to be able to foster excellence, and then be a body that really Sorry, I have a new dog downstairs.
We're all used to it on Zoom.
Yeah. But we want to be able to appreciate the art that everyone is creating, right? And be able to have an award show that honors, these different categories of content makers, from independent to major. And so really looking at that and looking at the podcast industry, what I set out to do within the industry, and where kind of collectively we all decided where we want to go, is that we want to make sure that the playing field is even for anyone that wants to get into podcasting. And not saying that you'll have every opportunity that the next person has that has a show with iHeart and you're doing your show from home, right? That's not necessarily even the playing field, but the access and information, if we can bring that playing field even, if we can make sure that women have the same opportunities as men in podcasting, that people of color are invited into the conversation in making decisions and in positions of power. And if we're also able to, like I said, recognize the achievements of everyone, we have an opportunity to start an organization that's still part of a young creative medium that doesn't have the baggage of 50 years of award shows. You know what I mean? I think that's the message that I've been trying to communicate to other organizations, other podcasters, is that, we aren't an organization that's trying to oversee podcasting. It's trying to make rules for what you can and can't do. We're not here to say this is good and this is bad. What we're here to say is everyone come get involved so that you can say what you love about podcasting, what you want out of podcasting. If you think this should be the podcast of the year, then you should be over here so you can vote on that being the podcast of the year. So you can submit that podcast of the year. And I think there's always resistance, I think, when you have anybody that's coming in and saying, we want to form this thing that's going to, have an award show that's going to, because I think red flags, because people, honestly, award shows have historically just not been fair, to a lot of different groups of people. And I think the difference is that, like I said, we get to start this from scratch. We get to get it right from, award show year one. You don't have to go award show year 50 and trying to correct all of the problems of the past, right? So it's inclusive, and I want this to be where we set the bar for the industry in terms of how to do things on a level of fairness across the board, and where people can come for resources. And it doesn't replace any organization that you might already be a part of. For me, it's like, how can we not only add to independent podcasters and people who are in the podcast industry, how can we be a bridge for other organizations, right? And that's what I've been talking to organizations about, is like, how do we become partners in a way where people who are part of your organization, that are members of your organization, are getting benefits from our organization. So you're being part of, organization A is additive, and you get some benefits from the Podcast Academy. So it's about working together and not trying to dictate kind of who's in charge and who's making the rules. So that's really the vision. And I think collectively, that's the page that we're all on. But we want to hear from the podcasters. We want to hear from people in the industry and what they want out of it and how we can be better, because ultimately that's what we want. We want to represent everyone. I think we've at least established a really good group of people that does represent various types of podcasters, from independent, women, people of color. I think we're doing. I think we've done a pretty good job thus far of setting the foundation, but we need to grow and get better every day.
All true. And I will say it's been interesting. We have about 600 members now, and we do see that they come from a wide variety of locations, and we have plenty of independent podcasters, and everybody gets a vote in those awards. So everybody does get to say something.
And one thing, and a lot of people don't know what goes on behind the scenes, like when this organization was starting, and without giving away too much information, but there was definitely a lot of emphasis put on who are going to be these governors, how many were going to be from, associated with major companies, how many are going to be associated with independent companies, how many are going to be independent podcasters, not necessarily companies, but just podcasters, racial makeup of the governors, how they self-identify in every other way, from sexual orientation and others. And also geographically, like we didn't want to, everyone's from the East Coast of New York, everyone's from LA. Like there was effort, it was well thought out, and there was effort put on every level of, you know, do we want this to be everyone from the US? No, let's try to at least, you know, reach out and bring someone in who's, you know, from across the pond, as they say, right? And
Yes.
we want to make sure that everyone's not LA and New York. We want to bring people in from the middle of the country. So it wasn't just like pick your, you know, top 15 friends in the industry or the most powerful people. There was a lot of thought that went into this, and that was something I wasn't part of. It was the structure of it, even when going after the initial governors. So it was, I think it's all started off putting the right foot forward and with trying to be inclusive. And I think we've then even progressed even further of how we can be more inclusive and representative of not just where podcasting is today, but where we want it to be, you know, in the years to come.
Yes, lots to come and lots of excitement. So we look forward to growing and to including more people, which is really what it's all about.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, we've got some great questions for you.
Good.
Let's start with, you said you didn't know anything in the beginning. So how did you approach learning? What was your focus? And what do you recommend to a novice podcaster these days?
That's a great question. And what I did was, instead of tying ourselves as a company to one like distribution partner, our strategy was, if we're going to do 3 podcasts, we should do them with 3 different companies, right? That way I get to learn from iHeart, Audio Boom, Cadence, and I get to talk to 3 different, you know, heads of podcasting. I get to talk to 3 different marketing departments, 3 different sales departments. And now I'm getting 3 times the information that I would if I had all my projects under one company. So that was probably the first strategic move we made about trying to learn the industry, was how do we, you know, get around as many people as possible and just learn the different ways of doing it. And what I found was that everyone does it differently, you know, and you find out, you also find out who you want to be in bed with long term, right? Like when it came time to do like our first slate deal, we're like, okay, we had a great relationship with Cadence 13 because they sold Up and Vanished season 2, and we loved what they brought to the table. They were at the time they had some backing from Intercom, so we were able to run like national commercials, all these other things that I probably wouldn't have known about had I not tested the waters, you know, and tried to get in business with new people. So that I definitely suggest that. Now, if you can only get in business with one person because you have one project, that's fine. But I think, you know, as you decide to scale and grow, you know, look elsewhere if possible, and learn from as many people as you can.
That's great advice. All right. How do you measure your success for your company and for your shows?
Oh man, it depends on the show. Success for the company is, I measure it in a couple ways. Obviously, like financial success is how we keep going, right? So that's obviously that matters. It's not the most important thing when you have a small company, because as long as you can continue to operate, you can give yourself more and more chances to be successful. The kind of company that we want to be, like, are we meeting those goals, right? Are we telling those stories? Are we doing things that other companies aren't doing? You know, that's kind of how we measure ourselves as well. Like, you know, doing Atlanta Monster after, you know, no one had really done a true crime podcast about focusing on Black victims, and this one had 29 Black victims, right? So we wanted to do stories that weren't being done, covering communities that weren't being covered as much as I liked. And now my kind of new way of moving forward in that same with the same thing in mind is like, how are we putting creative you know, women and people of color in front of the mic, hosting shows, telling their stories. So we measure success that way as well, of like, what content are we putting out? Is it impactful? Are we doing things that other people aren't doing? For example, Whistleblower is one of our new podcasts that we just wrapped, and it's a story that the NBA has been blocking for, you know, 13 years. And so it's like, when I heard that, I was like, okay, clearly it's a story that we need to do, because people don't want it to be told. So like I always want to make sure we're keeping our foot on the gas and trying to tell those kind of stories. And then success for a show is kind of the same thing, where the success is in getting the story out. And if it doesn't do 1 million downloads per episode, if it only does 100,000 downloads, but that story is now out there, and it might be actually bigger outside of podcasting in a way, the impact of it. So like I might have a show that didn't perform as well as a previous show, but the interest from Hollywood is so much greater because we went out on a limb to tell the story that other people weren't telling. And now people want to tell that story on a different level. And if our goal is to really do some good with our podcast as well, it's less about just the number of downloads, because if it doesn't peak as a podcast, hopefully it can peak as a TV show, as a movie or something like that. So we measure ourselves in various ways, but it's definitely, we try to make podcasts that do more than just like get headlines for downloads. I want to get headlines because we're trying to do something that's aggressive that no one else is doing, that's maybe controversial, or maybe highlight a subject that people don't want to talk about but needs to be discussed.
Fantastic. Well, I think that is an excellent note to end on. Donald, so much appreciation for your time and all of your wisdom here. This is being recorded, so anyone who is watching, we will put it up on the website in the next few days, and you can feel free to share. And we hope you have a great weekend, everyone, and good luck next week as we enter into an exciting time in our history here in the U.S.
Go vote. Don't be stupid this time.
You heard it here first. All right. Thank you, everyone. And you have a great day. And we invite you to